Hi everyone, this is Gavin, the MuseScore community leader. I'm excited to bring you this first video in customizing MDL to meet your needs with SFZ files. This is a pretty easy tutorial. You only need two tools, all of which are free. You need MuseScore 3 with the MDL extension, and you'll need a text editor. So for our examples today, we're simply going to be editing the way that the snare line sounds in MDL. And once you understand the basics of how to do this, you'll be able to do it to any of the other instruments within MDL. So the sample file we'll be using today is just a simple 16th note check pattern so that you can hear kind of the differences between the files. So what you will need to do once you have the MuseScore extension downloaded is find the MDL_snareline.sfz file. And that's pretty easy to find. Then you can open it in any old text editor you like. I am using a developer tool just because it helps highlight the things that I need to highlight in the video. But you can use Notepad if you want to. Just be sure to back up the original so that you don't mess it up. So the first thing that we'll do for anyone who feels like skipping ahead is we'll just highlight what you need to know. And then if you want to go ahead and jump in and do what you want all on your own, you can do that. But then what we'll do after we highlight what's going on in the SFZ file, we'll actually work up to making your own much better version, and we'll hear how the different parameters in the SFZ files actually affect your output. So this is the original snare line SFZ file that is downloaded as part of MDL 131. And you'll see that thanks to Christian Collins for doing the work here to get this thing started. And in this SFZ file, if you're not used to looking at developer stuff, it can start to look a little confusing. Thanks again to Christian Collins for making some great comments in here. So let's just kind of break down what's happening at a very high level. First thing you'll see here is that at the top are the hits. And that is just the basic sounds of hitting the snare drum. And within the hits, there are two sections. There's this section here, and then there's also these down here. And the difference between these two sections right now is the L level, which is the low level, and the high level, which in this case is 94, 1 to 94. These are your basic hits. And then this chunk down here are your accents. So level 95 to level 127. So that's basically just two velocities. Nothing, just think of them as accents and regular hits. These also take care of your taps too. But we'll get into what that means a little bit later. So there's some very basics here we'll go over. Again, like I said, we will build them all up as we go on. But for folks who want the short part of the video, you can get through everything you need to know in about the next minute. So within the group, this group simply means, this chunk of things. If you're used to looking at XML or HTML or anything else, they don't have closing tags for whatever reason in the SFZ format. Just is what it is, so don't worry about it. The key is the node on the staff, which actually interfaces with the XML file, which is a different part of this, which we'll get into in a different video. Low level is the lowest dynamic level. High level is the highest dynamic level or velocity. Loop mode one shot simply means that this is going to be played once, so whatever sample you see will be played once. This filter type is just the type of filter that is being applied. There are lots of different filters that you can go look at on SFZ format website. Same for the cutoff, and same for the velocity tracking 8000. So you don't really need to know a lot about this here. What is done incorrectly in the 131 file is this sequence length. So sequence length is actually a property of the group. And what the sequence length simply means is it will play every sequence position the number of times. So you can see sequence length 4. So I have sequence position 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we'll play all 4 of these samples in a row as a sequence length 4. So again, this should be part of the group, and we will fix that during our tutorial. There are some additional parameters here for delay. There are additional parameters for volume. Those mean exactly what you mean. Tuning, and you can see we even have a typo here, tuve instead of tune. The SFZ format's relatively forgiving in this implementation, so you don't have to be terribly precise. It'll just ignore anything that's wrong and keep moving. So that's what's in here now. What we're going to take a look at in this tutorial is simply fixing or making our own version of the hits. So let's break it down to its simplest parts. Let's go down to one drum. So again, all I've done here, I haven't deleted anything. This is just a very simple, basic file so that you can see what's going on. I still have all my other items down here. I just made space so we can look at what's going on. So the first thing I did is I made my own comment here that just says hits and taps, and another one for accents. And again, what we're going to deal with right now is just the hits and taps. So I've gone ahead and corrected the group. So I still have my high level and low level. For now, those are fine. Still need this as one shot. I made the sequence length 1 because I only have one region in my group, so it can't be any longer than that. And I've left all these other filters the same because they do actually do a pretty good job. So what happens when this file is run through MDL is it will play this sample, and this is a relative root file, or a document relative file. So it's going to find MDL samples, snare group, hit1.og. So it will play that in the first position with no delay and no tuning. Okay, pretty straightforward. So that means every time there is a snare drum hit, that's what it's going to do. So it's going to sound very machine gun-like. And so let's hear what that sounds like with this file played through SFZ, or sorry, through MuseScore 3. Sounds pretty machine gun-like. It's not real great, but it's a good starting point to start to build up and form your own. So the next thing that we're going to do is we're going to add in additional players. So we now have a lot more things going on. So we'll just break down what I just did. So if you think of a snare line, there's not usually just one player in a snare line. There are multiple performers in a snare line. So in this case, we have 4 different samples. So I've adjusted my sequence length to 2 in my group. And you can see that in sequence position 1, it will play all 4 of these samples in sequence position 1, and then it will play all 4 of these samples in sequence position 2. So it will go 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Now the important thing to note is it will always go 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. If you're playing triplets, position 2 will start the second triplet. So it just alternates. It's not every beat. It's not smart enough to do that. It is simply 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Okay, which is pretty good. So the other thing that you can see that's happened here is I have added hit 2. I have other samples in here. So hit 1 and hit 2 play together in the first position, and then hit 3 and hit 4 are in sequence position 2. MDL 131 ships with 4 different snare hit sounds, which are in the snare group folder, and ships with 4 sounds. So if you want to make your own, you can record as many of these as you like, mix and match them as you want, but that's outside the scope of this video. So let's keep going. So we have this, we haven't changed anything else, and let's hear what it sounds like. Now, when you are doing this, one of the slightly frustrating things about MDL right now is that if you do this, every time you make a change to your SFZ file, you have to completely quit and reopen MuseScore 3, which is kind of a slow process. There are some SFZ tools that you can use to kind of preview your sounds, but it gets a little more complicated. And this video is easy mode only. So let's take a listen to what this sounds like. Okay, so it's very back and forth. It sounds kind of better, but you're getting a little weirdness from these two things going on. You'll also notice that it was actually a little bit louder, depending on how YouTube is adjusting the volume. These sounds are additive, so the more you add in here, it will get louder within certain limits. So again, that's what our alternating sounds like. It's not great, but that's what it is. All right, so let's move on. Let's kind of take this up one more level. And because not every snare line is perfectly clean, what we're going to do now is we're going to add a little bit of delay to a couple of these samples. So what it's going to do is exactly what it sounds like. It's going to delay this sample. Whoops, don't do that. It's going to delay this line of this sample by 0.03 of a second. And then we're also going to delay this sample by 0.03 of a second as well, so that our ones aren't stacked and our hit twos aren't stacked either. Same for our hit 3 and our hit 4. All right. So let's hear how that sounds. Yeah, let's just, no. Okay, pretty dirty, not really what we want at all. But you can start to hear how it starts to sound a little more realistic. I've played in drum lines that sound like that, and it's not great. But of course, for the whole file, that's not what you're going for some realistic playback. So let's move on. Let's have the same situation here, but we're going to adjust a couple of things. We're still at sequence length of 2. We're going to introduce all 4 drums in each region here, or in each sequence position, I should say. So now, still in sequence position 1, I have 4 different drums, 1, 2, 3, and 4, and we have reduced the delay down to 0.2 of a second. So we're just going to clean it up some. And again, so now we have drums 1 and 4 a little bit out of time here on the first sequence position, and then drums 2 and 3 on the other. So let's hear how that sounds. All right, that was enough of that. So we're starting to sound maybe a little more realistic. It's still not great, but we'll keep pressing forward because it's all about learning how to make this better and make it your own, learning the parameters. So let's move on to step 6. Now what I've done in step 6 is I've increased our sequence length to 4. So now I have this group, sequence 1, 2, 3, 4. So again, I still have each sample in each group. So hit 1, hit 2, hit 3, hit 4, all in each group. And I've made the delay, I've done every kind of permutation of the delay here so that it's not quite so just be-doo-dee-doo-dee-doo-dee-doo, right? Now, if you're really paying any attention and you've really listened to this at all, what you'll notice is that you will still hear a little bit of a pattern going through, especially in something as basic as a 16th note check pattern. But let's go ahead and take a listen. It's different I don't know that it's better, but it's different. So we're starting to get a little bit better feel on how we can make this, kind of make improvements and tweak it. But let's just keep going to step 7. Now you can actually go you can find these files on your computer, and you can listen to every individual sample file that you like. And what I discovered when I listened to every individual sample file is that hit 4 is so far out of bounds it doesn't make sense. It makes the whole thing sound strange to me. It's it doesn't really work for, it just doesn't work for me. I don't like it. So what I've done in this case is I've done hit 1, hit 2, hit 3, and then I've left the 4th player as hit 1, but I've made the delay on player 1. Tried to make these delays different so that they don't overlap with player 1. As you can see, I kind of failed to do that here. Wasn't paying too close of attention, but that's what happened. So again, 4 players with a sequence length of 4, different delay, and you can see the other thing I changed here is on the 3rd hit, the 3rd sequence, I gave player 1 a little bit longer delay, so a little bit dirtier. And you'll actually be able to hear that pretty well, and what a bad idea this is, because you'll hear clean, clean, dirty, dirty, cleaner, cleaner, dirtier, dirtier. So beat 1 will be really clean, 3 is going to be kind of dirty, so is 3 and 4. Cleanish. So here is step 7. Step 7. Okay, so what you can hear, and if you're really kind of thinking about it, is what makes a realistic snare line sound is not that it is perfect, like sample 1, which was just kind of machine gunning, but the variations have to be so subtle that you can't really pick up the differences if you're just listening to it. The trap you'll fall into a little bit with this is that if you are doing it just a sample snare line piece like this, that's basically an exercise, it's really hard to make it sound super realistic because you start to have such critical ears that it's just never going to sound great. But you can do it if you want to. So that's a thing. Again, I don't know that it's better, but it's a thing. We're getting more complex. So let's go a little bit further. Go to step 8. And we're going to add in something a little bit new. So still a sequence length of 4. We have changed all of our delays now back down to 2. So we're going to clean it up a little bit. Those 0.04 of a second delay were just really bad. But in order to make the hit 1 sounds not kind of so identical and get that weird robotic, I don't even know, there's some technical term that, again, we're in easy mode, so I'm just going to pretend like I don't know it. But if we adjust the tune parameter, what this will do is it will take your sample, so sample hit 1, and it will tune it in increments of 1 cent. If you're a music theory major, you know what that means, or music theory major. If you know music theory, you know what that means. If you don't, just think of them as little itsy-bitsy steps as part of tuning something, up or down. So in this case, I chose to tune how I visualize drum 4, kind of my outside snare players. I've tuned it down 75 cents. So that means drum 1 and this drum now effectively sound different, right? They're not quite the same. So same sample, just tuned differently. So now when these things are hitting at the same time, it just doesn't sound quite so funky. Okay. So again, sequence length 4, delays are tightened up, but we've adjusted the tuning on the matching drums. So let's hear it. All right, that's not really great, but we're in the right direction. We have all the tools we need to kind of keep going and moving this thing forward. Now, one thing that I didn't say in the beginning, which should be kind of obvious, is that you can make your own samples and stick them in this folder. It will play basically any regular audio format you want. So OGG, WAV files, I think it'll do AIFF files, maybe even MP3. Just gonna try it out. So let's say you're a insanely popular drumline YouTuber and you want to make something that sounds like, oh, I don't know, Rubber Chickens. You could replace that, your own files here, and do a Rubber Chicken simulation of this whole thing. All right. So you can keep going, go nuts as long as you want on this. So you can start to see how this works. Do whatever sounds good to your ear. But let's look at one last file. And this is mine. I spent a fair amount of time on this. And I need to find my hits. So you can see there's a lot of stuff here. I've worked with this file way too much. Okay, so here's my hits. And what I did is I changed my sequence length to 8. So I have 8 individual sounds here. I added this group volume 2 because after getting all this in here, it made it all a little bit too loud. And I've done several things to this file. So again, I'm only using 3 of the samples because sample 4 is wacky to me. But I've treated each one of these as individual performers. So in my head, I have my leftmost snare, 1 in, off center, center snare right here. This is how I'm kind of treating center snare as this hit 2. To the right, 2 to the right, 3 to the right. And the other thing that it is, I adjusted the pan. So pan just simply means left to right in a stereo format. These OGG files that are shipped with MDL131 are mono, they're not stereo. So you can simulate actually standing in front of a drum line by adjusting the pan. Now, negative 45 and 45 might be too much pan, but for our purposes, it's a good place to start. So sequence position 1, delay of 2. So again, I'm kind of round robining through who is a little bit off the beat. And I've adjusted my tunings on the same. So what I did was I kept the tuning for player 2 consistent across all of my regions. So that keeps me safe from having any kind of weirdness going on. So the pan stays the same, the sample stays the same, the tuning stays the same. So I just changed the delay to simulate someone playing relatively consistently, consistent quality of sound, but a little bit off the mark here and there. Okay. And I just kind of adjust these as I see fit, with lots and lots of listening to make sure that I don't hear any major standouts. So let's take a listen to this version. So that's kind of where I've ended up so far. There's still a lot of tweaks that can be done. I did a few where sequence length of like 7 or so is pretty good because the odd makes it kind of, an odd number makes it so that if you have a little bit of kind of accents coming through or a little bit of irregularity, it's not always on the 1E and a 3E and a 1E and a 3E and a, but still 8's working pretty well here. I got my pans all right. I just kind of like the way this sounds as an improvement, at least over the default. So you've learned a lot about how to change all these parameters. Now, the trick to this is that after you do that, you then have to go in and do the same thing to the accents and all the other parameters in this really long, over here on the right, you can see this really long SFZ file over here. You need to adjust all of those things to make it really sound realistic. But if we look at the accents very quickly, what you can see is actually my sequence length is shorter because accents aren't all the time. So the accents don't have to be quite as differentiated, because you rarely are going to hear all on their own 5, 6, 7, 8, 12 accents all together. And it will round robin through each one of these accents each time those accents come up. But what I did is, you can see that if I look at these regions here, on my taps I went 3, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, but I changed the order of my samples in the accents, so it's going to give it a little bit different overall timbre, which helps. And I added back in hit 4, because hit 4, that was that kind of like ugly duckling that I didn't really care for in my taps. But in an accent, given the choices that I have for the samples that were provided to us by the MDL folks, it actually makes a little sense. It just makes those accents pop a little more, brings them out in the mix a little more, and I even tuned it up even further. So I changed my tuning as well. Left the pan the same. So again, I'm still viewing these as individual players, but it's different. So you can get as creative with this as you like. You can go nuts. You can record your own samples. You can have different velocities if you want to. But those are the very basics of creating your own snare line sound using MDL and the SFZ files. Again, check out SFZ Format's website to learn way more about the SFZ format than you ever really need to know. Join us on the MuseScore community at MuseScore, or join our Discord. We've got a Discord. You can join us on mdl.software to learn more. Thanks for watching. I hope this was helpful.